I published this book through IngramSpark, and I published this book through KDP. So the question is, for you, which one should you use? Now, if you want my really quick answer about whether you should use KDP or IngramSpark for your book, especially if you are a beginner, which I'll define in a minute, I can give you the quick answer, but you have to give me a thumbs up like. The short answer is, if you're a beginner and if you're a writer, you should choose KDP. But let me get into why that is, and let me explain why I'm so passionate about that opinion for beginner writers. This is How Stories Work with Jay Sherer, and today I'm going to tell you which one you should pick, KDP or IngramSpark, and I'm going to rate both of those services on a number of different criteria to help you choose. First up, let me define what I mean by beginner, because there's lots of different types of writers out there. Obviously, if you're looking at KDP or IngramSpark, you're thinking about self-publishing. Now, the question is, what stage are you in your writing career? And what do I mean by that? Well, one, I don't have a gigantic audience. I don't have loads of money to be able to promote my book. And I don't have a giant team of people behind me to help me get the word out about my books. That means I have a limited amount of resources at my disposal. Now, there's other people out there, writers who I've talked to personally, who have giant followings. They have a really big podcast or they have a really big YouTube channel, and they want to publish a book, and they already have an audience that they can go market their materials to. That's the difference between someone who's more of a beginner and somebody who's maybe more intermediate to advanced. I'm approaching intermediate, but I'm still a beginner, and I would still have a clear winner out of the two publishing options. So here's the criteria I'm going to use in this video to explain why I would choose KDP over IngramSpark for beginner writers. Ease of use, costs, both upfront costs and any kind of royalty share you would have to pay, quality, distribution, customer service, speed at getting your book out, reporting, and revenue or royalties. Let's break each one of those categories down, and then I'll show you why I believe KDP is the better choice for beginners. Let's take ease of use. Both IngramSpark and KDP are very easy to use. There's not a lot of difficulty in being able to set up your book and be able to publish your book through them. Now, there are some complications into setting up your files, but both services will make that process as easy as it can possibly be. It's pretty much a tie. I will say that IngramSpark has a slightly better user interface, but KDP's interface is very simple and doesn't try to do too much. Let's talk about costs, because this is really important to beginner writers. How much is it going to cost me to release my book? And with costs, there's a couple things to consider. One is the cost to publish the book. This includes things like buying an ISBN, just setting up your book to be able to print it. And the most important factor, at least in my opinion, the share of royalties that the publisher is going to take. That is a key one. And this is the biggest difference between KDP and IngramSpark. And if you watch my video on IngramSpark, you probably already know this, but I'll link to that in the description down below so you can check it out. IngramSpark is going to take more of your royalty share than Amazon is. Now, I won't break that down in detail because you can go watch my video about IngramSpark to see why that is. But the essential rule is that Amazon is a retailer, whereas IngramSpark is a distributor. That means that every retailer wants to take a cut from selling your book, and so does IngramSpark. So two different entities are taking a cut of your royalties. Whereas with KDP, you only have KDP that is taking that royalty share. It tends to be more favorable, especially for beginning authors, to use KDP over IngramSpark. Let's talk about quality, because one of the things that I hear from a lot of people is that they choose IngramSpark for the quality. Now, if you're looking at this question from an ebook standpoint, obviously the quality is pretty much the same. But if you are looking at this from a print quality, there are some minor differences. I don't find those differences super noticeable, but other people might. One other thing that kind of throws this off is I have not tried either publisher's hardcover option, which means that there might be significant differences in quality between the hardcover options. But in general, between the two paperback options, I don't find a large degree of difference. IngramSpark does, to me, seem a little bit more consistent in the print quality than does KDP, but I don't think that most people who are purchasing books are going to notice a significant difference. Granted, again, on the hardcover end of things, that's going to be where people want higher quality, and I have not seen KDP's quality as of yet, nor have I seen IngramSpark's quality because I have not chosen to go down that path. Distribution is an interesting one for both parties. Obviously, Amazon has the means by which you can distribute your book to other retailers, but I would give IngramSpark a slight edge here. But here's the complication. For beginning writers, a lot of them are going to sell their books on Amazon. In the self-published world, Amazon has a huge chunk of that market, and most people are buying self-published books through Amazon. In fact, most book searches are done through Amazon. So when you talk about distribution, Amazon's distribution arm is huge just to Amazon.com and Audible and its properties. Here again, we go back to the difference between a beginning author and an intermediate or advanced author. Intermediate and advanced authors are going to be more concerned about getting their books onto shelves, onto bookstore shelves. Why is that more important to them? Because they have a name, which means that someone could go into those stores, find a book and say, wow, I didn't realize this person had written a book, and they might pick it up. But for a beginning author, you're going to rely a lot more on just getting out there in the marketplace and trying to sell your book yourself. You can always order author copies from both KDP and in IngramSpark. And I would suggest ordering author copies from KDP and taking those to local bookstores in your area to start with. I don't think you need the distribution network that IngramSpark offers until you're more advanced in your career and your name is more widely known. Next up, let's cover customer service. Now, neither one of these options is going to have great customer service. And the reason why is that the economics aren't there. A lot of self-published authors never make much money. So you can imagine if they're paying somebody $10 an hour to deal with customer service problems, they need to sell books in order to make up for that customer service cost on their end. A lot of what you're going to find with KDP and with IngramSpark is that it's difficult to get a hold of customer service and have them be extremely helpful. From the KDP standpoint, it's mostly done via email. And I will say that their employees are very friendly via email, at least in my experience. With IngramSpark, you can get somebody on the phone, but it's a lot harder to do. And in my experience, they have not been quite as friendly. I would basically give those two a tie. Now, when it comes to speed to getting your book out there, both of them are fairly fast. But again, because IngramSpark is a distributor, it has to then get those books into the respective retail outlets. So for example, IngramSpark has to get your book into Amazon's system. That just causes a delay of a couple more days or so, maybe a week. So if you're looking for speed to market, KDP is going to be pretty fast. Generally speaking, in my experience, as long as I've got all of my ducks in a row, I can get a new book out on Amazon within 48 to 72 hours, no problem. And a lot of times that's even 24 hours. The last two things on here, KDP wins, and by a lot. The first is reporting. As a beginning author, you're going to want to know how many books you're selling. Why? Because you're going to be trying new things that you've never tried before. Things like Amazon ads or Facebook ads, or just, maybe going on guest spots on podcasts or things like that. PR activities. What you want to know is, how did that activity, that marketing activity, that PR activity, how did that affect my book sales? Well, KDP is going to tell you that almost right away. But IngramSpark isn't going to tell you that for about 60 days and sometimes even longer. Basically, IngramSpark has to wait for the retailers to report the data back to them before they can deliver it to you. I've had massive problems with that because I've tried to run advertising campaigns, found that those advertising campaigns weren't working, but I had to run them for a full 3 months with IngramSpark. Whereas with KDP, I could run it for a few days and know what the result of those advertising campaigns were. So if you're looking for good reporting, you're going to want to stick with KDP and not so much with IngramSpark. Now, IngramSpark can't do a lot to control that because they are reliant upon the retailers to get them the data. So it's not like they're trying to withhold information from writers. It's just that they can't access it as fast as the direct retailers can. And finally, we're going to talk about revenue. Which is the better platform for receiving royalties? Well, I talked about this a little bit earlier when I talked about costs. Ultimately, if you go direct through the retailers, you don't have another middleman like IngramSpark. So your revenue tends to be a little higher if you go direct through a retailer. That makes KDP's revenue platform a little bit better than IngramSpark's. And I don't think IngramSpark tells you how exactly all of the royalties are factored, which I also don't like. Watch my full video on IngramSpark to look at how that process is done. So in the end, which one should you choose? In my opinion, for beginning authors, it makes a lot more sense to choose KDP. The reality is you're going to sell most of your books via ebook or paperback. Now, you may sell some hard copy books at events that you do or book signings that you set up. But when you're talking about selling self-published books for a beginner writer, there's not going to be a lot of retail bookstores, brick and mortar bookstores like Barnes and Noble or local bookstores that are going to have your book in stock. It's far more likely that you're going to sell digital copies or paperback copies through major digital retailers. That's just where a lot of people are buying books these days. You can do a hyper-localized strategy where you try to go out and get local book stores to carry your books. But again, you can do that with KDP because you can have a whole stock of your books by ordering author copies and then selling those to the retailers, and then you've got the revenue already. So for me, the choice is pretty clear here. Going with KDP over IngramSpark is the right choice unless you get up to the point where you have such a big name that distribution becomes far more important to you. Then you're talking about a few different kinds of issues there relative to how do you get it into as many major bookstores as you possibly can. But that's a very different kind of self-published writer. And if you're like me, that's not going to help you all that much. If you enjoyed today's video and it helped you make a better choice about self-publishing, hit the like button for me. It helps more people get to see the content. If you have a question for me, something I didn't address, leave that down in the comments below and I will try and address it over time. Thanks for watching and check out my next video if you want to learn more about publishing or storytelling in general.